because really that's about all we can do about beauty is celebrate it. You can't coerce it, and you can't catch it anyway. You can't. It escapes any kind of pinning down. It's something which is too elusive. It's the strongest and most immediate kind of presence when you feel it, but to make it stand still, to make it something which can be taught or caught, much less bought, is really impossible. And I think also, as I said to you last time, I think it's fatal to seek it. It's fatal to pursue beauty. I suppose that one of the things that has always puzzled me and really bothered me about our wonderful idea of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You know, and everybody knows, I think by this time, that the pursuit of happiness results in greed and misery and despair. And happiness is not anywhere near being caught by anybody who pursues it. And beauty is the same. Beauty also, if it's pursued, becomes poison. I think it's very clear in people's lives. Some people flatter themselves that they made their life an art. Well, they're usually perfectly horrible people. Don't you agree with me? I mean, I think they're dreadful, because life is not supposed to be an art. It's supposed to be lived, and the whole sense of what is really artificiality, which is absolutely essential for art, is perfectly disastrous in life. And people who live for beauty or seek beauty and everything are in despair, the same as if they sought happiness. These things are gifts of the Spirit. And you have to have, as I said, an aptitude. And the idea of demanding a gift, demanding or pursuing or feeling that you have a right to a gift, means that you don't understand that it's a gift. You think it is something which is your right, or something which you can have. I suppose that that is one of the most obvious things in terms of our own living, that it is not possible really to pursue beauty. Beauty is, in a way, it's as if it were a seal of approval on what has been done, or what is believed, or what has happened, or what is lived. It's a stamp, almost like a proof of the correctness or rightness of things. But it's as if you wrote QED. It has been demonstrated at the end of whatever it is, a thought, or a person's life, or a person's work. Beauty comes at the end, and not because it's sought. It comes because its own self is there, and there isn't any way to say how or why, because the thing is right. I mentioned to you last time about Vicki Hearn's book, Adam's Task, in which she said that you can tell whether a horse is being trained correctly if it becomes more beautiful as it's trained. And this isn't something which is an arcane kind of thing. It's something which people immediately see. And all trainers know that this is the result of the horse being correctly trained, so that it moves into beauty through its correctness, through its rightness, through its being exactly what it should be. And that is really, I think, what happens all together. In fact, everybody ought to consider the training of anything, thing that we call an education. What is wrong with it if it doesn't produce something beautiful? If it produces instead something ugly and something cruel and something selfish, dark, despairing. Now, I have also taken a lot of called Pain and Gain. To try to talk about that at any time is always difficult, but to try to talk about it in a period when the sacred is not only not known to most people, but is actually thought of as something undesirable. The phrase "nothing sacred" is a kind of boast. It is a recognition that the sacred really doesn't exist. And I think, if you ask people like those wonderful people go around asking people on the street things, if you ask them what is sacred to you, what do you suppose they would say? I think it would be very difficult for almost anyone to answer. People used to say something like motherhood is sacred. Well, you know the state condition of the sacredness of motherhood at the present time. It's very far from it, but being assaulted by Freud and assaulted by people who are afraid that they might be mothers for various reasons, and whose whole lives may be devoted instead to avoiding motherhood because they have a scorn for it, not in a sense that it's sacred. And the same, of course, is childhood. Childhood used to seem to be sacred. And at the present time, there is no sense of the sacredness of anything that I can think of that people would really, how about apple pie? Apple pie used to be sacred, In motherhood, we're thought of as two great centers of sacredness. And poor apple pie is as bad off as motherhood, because everybody's thinking either of dieting or of avoiding the crust with cholesterol, and the whole thing is no possibility of aspiring to sacredness anymore. And as for life itself, see, people don't think of life as sacred. They absolutely do not think of it. And in fact, if you suggest that it is, they think that you are really ignorant or bigoted or foolish, reactionary, I don't know what. But the idea that life is sacred is the farthest thing from most people's imaginations or ideas, and not just all life, that is the life of animals and life of plants, but human life is not thought of as sacred. It is thought of as something which is part of demographics, as part of something which can be finished off with no trouble. Imagine how different the attitude toward war would be if there were a real sense of the sacredness of life, of the sacredness of anything, I think. But we lack it entirely. Now, in the time when there is a feeling of the sacred, everything can partake in that. And individual people who have the gift of knowing something about the sacred can occur at any time. And their vision of life is that it is all sacred, that we live in a world in which nature is sacred, and animals and all the invisible things, every imaginable thing, partakes of sacredness and must be treated with that kind of respect, that kind of bowing to the thing itself that we lack. It is curious. And you think of anything that people would bow to now? I can't think that there's anything that they can feel that the thing is sacred. And it's a darkening of life not to see anything that has to do with the sacred. We're so far from any kind of, I think, any real conception of it or any real interest in it. You can try to work out why that was. I mean, why that has gone this far and why this is true. Why the phrase "nothing sacred" isn't scandalous and horrifying and blasphemous. I don't know whether we can isolate all of the things, but I do know that the power to see and to know the sacred is something which is given to some people.
There was a great example of that in the Baal Shem Tov, a great religious person who was asked, how can you reconcile the evil in the world and the pain and the suffering? And he said, what evil? You have the same thing with Constable. When somebody said to him, how can you bear the ugliness of the world that man has made? And he said, what ugliness? You see, it is a recognition of the being of everything and a recognition of the meaning of everything. So that nothing can be meaningless. Absolutely nothing can be meaningless. And nothing can be alien. Nothing can be far away, meaningless. Now that is a great gift. It's a gift on the same par as the gift of the aptitude for beauty. But our imagination has gone so far from that we think, for instance, though, people can imagine or do think that we create God, that God is created in our image instead of the other way. A lot of people have said that, as a sort of a clever saying. And who was it? Was it Shaw that said if clams had a divinity, it would be an enormous clam? Well, of course, this is absolutely untrue. This is totally untrue. Throughout the whole of history, people have tried to see the thing which lies behind appearance, that is the divine source of appearance. And they have never been satisfied with that as a human being. They've never been content to use a human being to show that power at any time, anybody. The only time that can happen is when the belief in the divine nature of creation, of the whole of creation, has disappeared. It's only when that is possible. That's the only time that it's possible. Let's look at a couple of slides. Now, throughout all of history, you find people choosing animals as a way of conveying what it means to have the power of generation, the power of creation. And they use them throughout all societies. They become sacred. The bull is sacred practically over the entire world. The ram, all of the great generative animals. The horse has been sacred for not only for a few people, you see, but the very earliest people. There are more heads of horses. That's about, probably 40,000 BC, maybe. A society which had, of course, no writing and no history, but it leaves these images of animals. And the bear so one of the great sacred animals. And why is it a sacred animal? It's not because it's a bear, but because it holds and contains this power of regeneration and the mysterious association which people have with bears. Because apparently a skinned bear looks exactly like a person. And this has always been recognized. And people have always felt that kind of awe and terror of the skinned bear. And it has, and all over Europe and all over Asia, the bear has been sacred for millennia, literally millennia. And because it can contain, you see, an animal, by the fact that it's an animal, can contain a kind of purity of what it is that we can't as human beings. And I think that for this, you see, there never is anybody that's only clever. There never is anybody that's only bright or only stupid or only anything. We're all a marvelous combination of all kinds of things. But animals can embody something which is much simpler, so that they have been used always in folk sayings and of course in art and forever. A marvelous thing. The fox knows many things and the hedgehog knows one big thing. It's one of the great, the absolutely great things. Not those animals can condense literally centuries of human experience. And we know then when we hear that, and if we know anything about either of those animals, we know something that is true for all of us. That is, that the light goes over farther than the animal, farther than what it is. So that in all ways of illuminating life, people have used animals as the thing which conveys the powers that we see as the powers of generation. And let's look at the next two. I could show you, of course, just from any society, just no end of animal forms used that way. And when the attention is on the human being, it never is in any effort to make the human being look like real human beings or ordinary people. In any way, they can't be, you see, because ordinary people cannot stand for these large things, these huge things. They can't contain them. And so the human being is either radically abbreviated in the wonderful example over on the right, which looks like Dolly Parton in her present condition, but is also kind of a marvelous double of male, so that the breasts become testicles just as easily as breasts, and so that it has this wonderful abstract sense of generation and of creation and of the continuation of the race. And of course, look, both of these images and the end of the ones which are called Venus figures, of probably, well, maybe 30,000 BC, a long, long time ago, and they're tiny. You know, they're only about 4 inches, 5 inches high, and they've just been found all over the world. Little strange images of the regenerative power of the human being. It was worshipped and is sacred. You see, is one of the deepest elements of the sacred that we ever can know or experience. Let's look at the next two. And also, there is always in people, again, you see, one thing like sexual regeneration is only one aspect of the conviction of the nature of the ultimate power, the ultimate divinity, the ultimate God, which I think everybody and every society that we know anything about does believe in, that believes in that kind of veiled, always veiled, never shown, never really able, no one ever able to imagine that he could show it. So that there's a kind of agreement about the second commandment. And here you have two wonderful instances of it. You see, the one on the left is a Buddhist image of Buddha, and over on the right is the image of Christ, but it's Christ as a form of the lamb, of a sacrificial lamb. It's the adoration of the lamb. And here Buddha is in the form of the Bodhi tree under which he was sitting when he was enlightened. And why? Because actually, even to show a Buddha who was a human being and is not just the whole power of the universe, but still, at the time of the deepest piety, it was impossible to find the shape of any human being that could possibly satisfy the inner convictions of the person looking at the image of Buddha. The same thing happened with the image of Christ. It was impossible, and he was first represented, as you know, in forms of a fish and forms of peacocks and all kinds of animal forms, avoiding the image of the human being, because we know ourselves too well. We know too well what we are, and we know our limitation. And to imagine the whole of divinity caught in any human form is impossible for us. We know the world would fall apart if that were true. And so that urge not to show even a figure like Christ, who was a man and lived in a human body, or like Buddha, who was a man and lived in a human body, but still the power to imagine what kind of body could contain that level of spirituality is people are just defeated by it. Let's look at the next slide. It takes a long time and long imaginative venture, really, to create such an image. And the tendency, instead, is to move away from it into a kind of abstraction, of feeling what is known is the order of the universe, the fact that it's marvelously complex and marvelously interwoven, things dependent on other things, so that the image of that kind of complexity is closer to the nature of the divine, or of such a thing as this. Is a revelation of Hildegard of Bingen, whose image this is she called the cosmos. It is simply the whole cosmos. But it is the power behind the cosmos that cannot be reduced to an ordinary person. Let's look at the next, or even an extraordinary person, until the belief is weakened, until there isn't a really very great belief. Then you can make a perfectly ordinary looking, and in fact people do after the Renaissance, during the Renaissance. The image of Christ becomes ordinary, even common, vulgar, with the idea of getting at something which is truer. But you see what's happened is that the divinity, the idea of divine power in an individual is gone. And therefore, the person is left more real to people who don't believe that there is any real divine power. And let's look at the next two. And one of the things which over and over you have in all kinds of societies, over on the right you have an example from China, the Sumi one, of Liang Kai. And here, another vision of Hildegard, trying to tell us something about what it is to encounter the divine. How is that? And you see, she has this really kind of innocent way of like light falling on her head, and not the very successful rendition of this. It seems instead to be rising from her, and the monk is looking, and she wrote all this down, and so that her visions were very well illustrated, both in her own time and later. A monk is peering in at her. She was bathed in light. And over you see that image of light. You remember that when Moses came down from Mount Sinai, he had actual light around him. And again this has been described by people, of that intense spirituality develops a visible light. And you know that throughout the Middle Ages, clear into the Renaissance, Moses was shown with horns of light. With horns, because the translation said horns of light. And so he's shown in the Michelangelo, he's shown the great Moses of Michelangelo, is shown with horns, which certainly must mystify a lot of people who don't know why this is. But he was surrounded by radiance, by light. And she was bathed in light, literally. And there is a monk meditating, and the way that's shown, that sense of the absolute turning in, the absolute control of the body, so that it doesn't waver or dispense itself, doesn't move outward at all. When you're painting in a Sumi style, you have to have your hands turned in. You have to have this hand turned in. If you turn the hand out, all of the energy is lost. And you can never make a Sumi painting with your hand turned out, because everything you see has to be concentrated. It has to be pulled in. It has to be directed and pulled in. And of course, characteristically, we're never directed or pulled in. You know, we have, long before Darwin, we've had a monkey nature that keeps us jumping and hopping around from one thing to another in our own minds and in our actions and everything else. And to still that monkey is very, very hard to do. I mean, extremely difficult to do. Requires enormous discipline. Mainly, of course, it requires the absolute desire to transcend that brokenness and to make, again, the wholeness that can only be achieved in that pulling in of the self. Let's look at the next. One of the ways in which people pray, they see it just exactly as meditation. They're images of prayer from all over the world. And they're the thing that's so startling and also so pleasing and comforting, at least to me, is that they're the same in almost all the whole world. There are very few ways in which people pray. And this is one of the commonest. This is the figures that are called orant figures in the history of art because that's what they are, praying figures. They have their hands up like this. And this is a Coptic example of the Virgin praying. And the hands up like that, you see, it's an attitude, well, it's just like hands up. You know, what you're doing is saying, I am powerless. I give myself to this experience. I'm not holding back anything. See, there's nothing up my sleeve. Is that the whole feeling is of that. And it's also, of course, the same gesture of surprise or astonishment or of fear, all things which come together somewhat in prayer. So it's one of the most universal, and over time and over geography, ways of showing, of actually praying, actually standing to pray with your hands like that. And the hands are of course, extremely important, so that they're always shown larger, because in a way they are the receivers as well as they are helpless. That's marvelous. Hands reaching out in prayer on the one on the right. Let's look at the next two, because here you can see it again. Over on the right, a Buddha, here an angel in the same kind of position, and the hand held up is the hand that is a hand of blessing. And again, all kinds of places. In Indian art, these were very carefully codified, and each one had a separate name. This was the Abhaya gesture, it was the gesture of blessing. There's a teaching gesture. They're all separate gestures, which were the only ones that were ever used. But they're very universal. They're not just something which had to do with Buddhism. They have to do with, actually you see many people teaching doing like this. It's a very natural teaching thing. And sometimes it's sort of, counting off on the so-and-so, and then also you have, and so on. But it has this teaching quality. And let's look at the next one over here. Oh, I love those things. See, that's the hand of that figure there. And the quality of the sacredness of hands, of the sacredness of the body, and the really inexhaustible meaning of the hand comes very clear when you see the hand separated. Just the hand. Let's look at the next one. And another one, of course, is kneeling, or half kneeling. And again, all over the world, that happens to be from China. But I could show you, of course, endless images of prayer as kneeling. Let's have the next one over on the right. And when the figure of Buddha, or the figure of Christ, are shown, and it's always after a long period. That is really, in the instance of Buddha, it was at least 700 years. And then only rarely shown. And in the image of Christ, it was, the image wasn't settled for at least 500 years and close to 700 before it really was settled. And then, of course, when it was settled, it, exactly as with the Buddha image, it stays and it becomes a part. It can't settle unless it's in everybody's mind. It can't settle unless it's, in a sense, agreed on, not by any kind of vote or anything, but just because it is the thing that it is, it's agreed on, and then it stays that way. But nonetheless, though these are not, you see, they are not divinities in the sense that they never had a human form. They had both human forms, but they were filled with the divine, both of them. And yet they have to be separated from the rest of the world. They have their mandorla, which that's what that's called. It's like a whole screen of light, an oval screen of light behind them. And this is a device that's used in Buddhism and in Christianity, and it is not anything which was imitated. It's again that feeling of an actual screen of light, an actual emanation of light coming from the body that separates these figures from the figures around them, saints, other bodhisattvas, all animals of the apostles, and so on. Let's look at the next two, because again, you see how that happens over and over. And you see also, look how wonderfully the taste, or how much the feeling that something becomes both orderly and immovable or unshakable by the linear treatment of drapery. See, the drapery is abstracted. It's not a drapery which we really know or ever expect to see in that wonderful patterning of the drapery at the bottom of the Buddha figure over on the right, or the similar one here. You see how it's so wonderful to me. I really think that the joy of the history of art is the sense of human similarity, human shared experience, and the discovery or the invention of the same things for very different in very different societies. It's the farthest thing from the thing that people constantly try to teach people now about. You can't move from one culture to another, and if this culture is like this, you can't do this and that, and you can't understand. It's an absolute lie. You see, it's completely untrue. Because you can understand it, because it is human, and we are utterly limited creatures. We are finite creatures, and we can only think in certain ways, and we can only be satisfied by certain things. And it's a very narrow little band that we can live in. You know, if we get too high up, no oxygen, dead. If you're too low down, pressure, dead. I mean, you know, we have this tiny band that we can live in, and that's all. And that's all anybody. And this tiny body that we are living in, that's going to be the same all of your life, you know. It's going to change constantly, but it's going to be has to have the same amount of oxygen, have to have the same food, have to excrete the same way, on and on through your whole life, and everybody that ever lived. So that naturally, when you go to make a work of art, it's going to be something which you share with other people. And the greater the work of art is, the more people share with it. So that you know, there's nothing, and we have nothing that any cultural anthropologist would say in common with, say, Aeschylus. But you can still, with a good reading of the plays, you can still transfix people with ideas that they never, you know, think they never have, but they do have. Ideas of kingship, ideas of faithfulness, all kinds of things, you see. And the same thing is true in the actual visual forms. What is the most gracious treatment of drapery? What is it that can happen with drapery that turns it into something which has a quality of the eternal? It has a quality of something which is always has been and always will be. And these are just far apart in time and far apart. This I think it's about probably 2nd or 3rd century A.D. Let's look at the next two. And another thing that we all as human beings love is gold, and we really love it in a marvelous, marvelous way. And whether it's nature, its actual nature, its wonderful way it sheds light, and its quality of being soft but being absolutely invulnerable, so nothing happens to it, it just is. And it's constantly been used And of course, it absolutely horrifies people who have no sense of the sacred that you would put gold on a whole figure of a divine image. Why, that's just terrible. You know, there are people starving. It's the whole business of the idea that the divine image must be gold, must have this quality of gold in order to fulfill itself, because it's almost the only way that you can be sure that it's divine, is that if it's covered with gold. And that otherwise it takes too much of the mundane. And when that sense, you know, the whole extraordinary sacredness of the world and the purity and absoluteness of gold, when the feeling of the sacredness of the world is strong, everything partakes of the same nature and wants to have the same kind of brilliance, the same kind of dazzling quality. The example over on the right is a tapestry. It looks exactly like a lot of paintings of the early part of the century, but it's a tapestry from Norway in about the 8th or 9th century. And what it is April. You see, the month of April. See all the birds, and the person is out in the field, really, planting. But see, the whole world has requires the same treatment that the divine figure requires. It also must be beautiful. It must not be just like the world. It must be some way greater, more mysterious, more impersonal, more marvelous. And so April could just as well be an image of Christ. Let's look at the next two. There's more marvelous gold creatures. One over on the right, pure. You see how much alike they are. This is a medieval Christian, a rather Romanesque Christian. And over on the left is, of course, the Buddhist figure, Chinese. Let's look at the next two. And I could just show you no end of images that aim to dazzle. You see, they want to partake of the same kind of light, the same kind of brilliance. And you know that when Moses came down, the people from Mount Sinai, they had to cover their eyes. He was so dazzling. And that sense of the dazzle of the sacred can really be caught by gold, and can be caught and shown by gold. And the refusal also, if simply to be satisfied with the ordinary world, to require of it and to understand it as something which is very much larger than any such experience. Over on the right, you have one of the great miracles of Buddha, in which he endlessly multiplied himself until he filled the whole universe. It's not something which you can understand, you see, with reason. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with the enormous power and the fact that the sacred penetrates everything, that nothing really can be distant from it. Nothing really can be anything but sacred. So that the Buddha spirit, the Buddha nature, penetrates the whole universe. And that's the essence, of course, of the conviction of the sacred at all. It's the same way in which we recognize the sacredness of the life of a tree and wouldn't just go and chop it down for no reason, or the life of an animal, or the life of the least bug. I mean, with how much compassion do you kill the ants that get in your kitchen? And it's very important to know about yourself. Do you apologize to them? You should. They're doing their little work. And here again are Hildegard's vision, which is the ultimate constant vision, and again one which is just in part of language, the great mountain on which there is seated the person of extraordinary brightness. That was her vision. Let's look at the next two. There is this urge to keep the thing from being easily seen. I think that it's sometimes even a desperate urge, as in the Tibetan figure over on the right, that if we can make this brilliant enough and blurred enough and suggest a kind of vibrancy, the endless movement, of everything in the world is in continuous movement. From the least little viruses to our blood to the anything that you can think of, you see, is just a part of a rhythmical movement and a continuous one. There's never any still point that you can find in the world. And here, this is motherhood coming. The title of this vision was Motherhood Arising Out of the Union of the Spirit and Water. Now, you see, that's nothing having anything to do with the ordinary world. And it aims not to be like the ordinary world, and isn't, because it is something which is aiming to see beyond that, and therefore it cannot use the accustomed forms of the world. Let's look at the next two. I show you these because they're marvelous similarity. There are no, and this is King David playing his musical instrument, and over on the right is the Buddha. But you see how people come to the same conclusion about what it is the thing should look like. And what is it trying to look like? It's trying to have some sense of kingship, it's trying to have some sense of the power of a person and the importance and seriousness, but something which is still not of the ordinary world, not at all what happens every day to everybody. Let's look at the next two. I love this little figure because you can see that what he's trying to do is do the same kind of thing, and trying to pull himself together to be a single being, and of course he doesn't succeed because it doesn't happen, and we have our QED. It's not beautiful. It's interesting, it's delightful, it's charming, it's funny, it's all kinds of things, but it doesn't become beautiful. It doesn't enter the realm of harmony, of proportion. It doesn't enter that realm. Let's look at the next one over here. Now, the sense of order, the sense of the strictness of the order of the universe is one of the strongest ways in which the sacred can be shown. That this is the thing which is intuited by people, and it's the thing which people all over the world have intuited, that there is a divine order, that there is something which really cannot be broken, and it only can seem to be broken. And that kind of absolute regularity, of absolute control that is implied in both of these. This is again the miracle of Sravasti, with Buddha filling the universe with his images, duplication of images of himself. And over on the right, those are the elect entering heaven. They are the people who are saved, who are entering heaven. And there's no interest, you see, and there's no desire to make them strongly individuated. Not at all. They stand for the elect, and they stand for the order in which they will advance, in which they will move into heaven. And there isn't any of the disorder, just even the disorder of the fact that we're different heights. In a column of people, there are different, some are tall and some are short, there are different heights. So that also has to be denied, really, in order to get the sense of the absolute orderliness. Let's look at the next two slides of the world, of the universe. And you see they are as if, there again you have that, the power of the ordering of materials to strengthen and to hold something, so that the actual folds of the material keep these figures motionless, and they don't aspire to anything else. They don't look alike. In neither instance do they look alike. They're not identical, but they are contained in the same conviction. They're contained in the same comprehension of what this should be. Let's look at the next two. And there you see again the severity, because it's the difficulty of actually conveying the quality of order and the quality of harmonious representation of something with the sense of the power of it and the strictness, actually the danger, the fear that is invoked by the actual power of the divine ground. And that quality of something fearful or something frightening or something stern is very strong and is part of this quality of order. And in both of these instances, you see the Madonna and Child, which is a Coptic example over on the left, is as severe as possible. Can you imagine anything more remote from the sentimentalization of the Madonna and Child in the immediately after the Renaissance, and actually toward the end of the Renaissance? You see, this Madonna and Child have power. She has power over her child. And though the child is no child, but a perfectly grown person, and is king of the universe, and is conscious of that and able to make this Abhaya gesture, the gesture of blessing and peace, even though he's an infant, but she is larger. And that the whole power of the Virgin, as really having contained Christ and still holding the power over him in a way which is frightening. And in the Buddha figure over on the right, there's an almost complete obliteration of any kind of personality or softness. It's something which has almost a machine hardness. Let's look at the next two. Again, a Buddha and the Madonna and Child, and there again you feel all of our human need to make something which has these qualities, that has this sense of something which you confront, something which is absolutely straight and looking right, that you're looking right at, so that there isn't any wavering or any turning. It is something which is to gather you together, exactly as you must gather yourself together. And it helps in that gathering. It's a true icon because it keeps the movement outward away. It keeps everything channeled and funneled into this direct experience, the observation, the meditation on, and the prayer to the Virgin or to the Buddha image over on the right. And you see how these artists, as far apart and as unconscious of each other as possible, have come to exactly the same conclusion about drapery. And they both believe in that that linen fold pattern of the drapery, and the way that it moves over the arms. It could have been done by the same person even. And of course it isn't conceivable that it could have been done by the same person, because it's in a totally different time and a different place. Let's look at the next go. There's also something which I think is a depiction of the experience of the sacred, which again, in a period when that is believed in, everything partakes in it. Everything that is seen. It looks, the sacred sheep stand with the shepherd, and the angel announces to them, and a sacred bull is ridden by Shiva in the time when that's believed in. And everything partakes in this quality. And it is a very curious one. I'll talk about it just a little bit, because I think you can see it. It's something which has to do with going inside of the self, or it has something to do with listening. It has a quality of raptness. It's like people listening to music, or listening for something which is very difficult to hear. so that you know how your face voids any expression. You know what I'm talking about? Do you know at all what that means? When you're listening very intently to something that's hard to hear, it's as if you made any kind of face about it, you wouldn't be able to hear as well. You know what I mean? You still your face, you quiet your face in order to hear. Or if you're thinking very strongly or deeply, the expression of deep thought is absolute blankness. I had a marvelous, triumphant moment many, many years ago, many years ago, when there was a thing on the television called $64 question, or was it 64,000 by that time? No, $64 question. Anyway, you remember that Van Doren was on it, who was a very distinguished man, and who came of a very distinguished family, a very honorable and upright people. And he was actually cheating. They were giving him the answers. And I said to the person that was sitting with me, that man is cheating. And of course, this was from a long period of having taught school. The expression, you see, of somebody who's trying to look as though he's thinking about something is a totally different expression from the expression of somebody who's actually thinking about something. And Van Doren was making all of these I'm thinking expressions, you know. Oh, could that be, you know, frowns and raised eyebrows and little jerks and all kinds of things that go with the pretense of thinking or pretense of listening. And instead, the actuality of that kind of deep concentration is blankness. It's absolute blankness. They look stoned. And they are stoned by God, by the contemplation of the divine, and the conviction of the existence, the uniform existence throughout the whole world of the divine power. And so that expression, and you see how similar they are. That's, of course, a medieval one. This is a Chinese Buddha. Let's look at the next two. You're all familiar with this if you know anything about Gothic art, because this is the great expression of Gothic art. But it's also the great expression of Buddhist art. Look at this angel and that Buddha. You see, there's something in the way, and of course the gesture would, if that arm weren't broken, would be very much the same. But there is a kind of blankness, as though the person were being moved by something outside of him, as though he really were an instrument of something which is outside. And the angel is exactly such a figure. Let's look at the next two. Here again, this is a Gothic figure, 13th century. The Buddha head is probably about the 3rd or 4th century A.D. Let's look at the next two. You see, they look like they're all thinking about the same thing. They're all listening to the same music. They're all literally listening to the same music. And their faces then take this curious kind of blankness with something also which is like rapture. It's a rapturous expression. And the quality has something which is close to joy. It is a kind of a secret rapture that is, it seems to actually to emanate from them. Let's look at the next two. You see that it's as though they knew some marvelous secret, and that they're contemplating it. They're looking at it. They're rejoicing in it, and it is. There's no darkness, you know. There's no despair. There's no bewilderment. It's a sense of an absolute conviction. Let's look at the next two. And here I think you can see this wonderful similarity between, because here that sense of the rapture secret, the secret rapture, that is so much a part of the others, comes to the surface. And you can see it in this version of the Annunciation. I'm sorry the slide has that dark part on it. But you see, there's something almost sly. Again, it gives that feeling of secretness about both of these. That the smile of that Buddha is very, very strange. You know, but it's in a way, it's absolutely indifferent to us. It is really indifferent to what we may think or feel. It's so involved, so absolutely caught in its own rapture, caught in its own secret, that it has no need for us, really. It has nothing that we can give it. Let's look at the next two. And there is also something which is one of the most extraordinary revelations, really, that you can see in this area of the sacred, and that is the way in which that secret rapture continues, but takes on something which is more benevolent, more kindly. It's a moment in any development in the history of art where that only lasts a very short time. It's a kind of peak moment of partaking of that kind of rapture, that kind of joy, but also having something which has to do with compassion, with a very profound, it's our old loving knowledge. It has a sense of such profound loving knowledge of the world and of us and of everything, that comes forth as a compassionate gesture, a compassionate movement of the body. There's a Christ figure and there's a Buddha figure. And they both have this sense of bending toward us, of moving toward us. Let's look at the next two. I think you can see it wonderfully there. This is a Kuan Yin figure, and the Kuan Yin figure was in India, was a male figure. It was Avalokiteshvara. And in the Chinese, when Buddhism moved to China, when he was a male figure, he was a saint or a bodhisattva that was of great tenderness and great love and great compassion and a quality of caring for and protecting. And when he moved to China, he became female and became a Kuan Yin, which is a feminine figure and has this same wonderful sense of caring and of devotion and protecting. Again, the gesture is the gesture of protection. And the Virgin and the Child over on the right have become also something which partakes of this quality of gentleness, of not that remoteness, but of something which is gentle and loving. Let's look at the next two. But still is a part of a world which is a divine world, or which is a sacred world. Virgin and Child and Buddha. See, if we look at that, they function as an icon because we have the power to imitate. And when we see something, we imitate it. And if you look for a long enough time, and this was, of course, the function of the icon, was that you meditated on it, that you looked at it as long as you could, you prayed in front of it, you thought in front of it, you visited it all the time, that formed your inner life, that formed you in something which was itself compassionate and in a way beyond or above the ordinary world. Let's look at the next two. There again, you see the gold adds to this, and the beauty, and they share in the same kind of feeling. This is the Buddha Maitreya, the Buddha who is to come. You remember that Buddha was simply one of a whole series of Buddhas, and there is still one who is to come. Every religion anticipates the coming, and the coming of the next Buddha is inherent in Buddhism. And he is waiting in a kind of heaven and is always shown as marvelously beautiful and marvelously rich in his garments and his clothes and his jewels. You see, unlike the Buddha on earth, he is always always jeweled and has a wonderful crown, but he has also the deepest compassion that he will actually become the next Buddha with that descent into the world and descent into the sorrow and agony of the world. And of course, Buddhism's conviction that the world is just the worst imaginable place, and that all of our lives are lived in suffering and agony, and that to enter the world is this disaster, and the only hope is to evade it. So there is this compassionate Buddha looking down from heaven on our suffering, and the compassionate Madonna. And both of them golden, you see, both of them part of that world of preciousness and that world of light, a world of the extravagantly beautiful light of gold. Let's look at the next one. Oh, I'm sorry, that one's... Can we fix that one? Because he's one of the most beautiful of all the Buddhas. So it's from Cambodia. And I think that expression on that figure is one of the most compassionate and one of the most... And you see, it has absolutely no sentimentality. There is no quality of the sentimental at all. And yet there is no harshness or nothing which it is again that feeling of loving knowledge, of the knowledge of love and the love of knowing of something, and knowing it the way it really is. And that figure and this one too, you see, they have also that sense of secret rapture. But they have added to that something which is infinitely compassionate and loving toward the world. Let's look at the next one. Next one. There again is Buddha and the figure of Christ, both surrounded by angels, both in a halo, both using the teaching gesture. You see, Buddha completes it with his other hand, but the hand of Jesus is also a teaching hand. And the angels of Buddha's are little small up there, but his halo is so magnificent. And of course, then you have to realize that this was painted, so that it was dazzling as it could be. And in its absolute sense of the control and perfection of the control of the body, and that totally, all human beings have a kind of funny knobbiness to them, and all of that has been removed, and yet it seems to us like a human figure. Let's look at the next two. I suppose one of the great examples is of the quality of the sacred as something joyful and beautiful, of something which is awe-inspiring, terrifying even, something beyond our real comprehension, but part of our longing, is in the Grunewald painting of the birth of Christ, of the Nativity, and really it has all kinds of different titles. Sometimes it's called Christmas, that is the Mass for Christ. But here it is, this a wonderful turning together of the ordinary world and an absolutely impossible world which we never see at all. And the angels, she's holding the Christ child, but is accompanied by the most marvelous supernatural creatures that are angelic hosts, literally, and playing musical instruments. You know that's all angels have to do with musical instruments. It doesn't work the other way, but it is true that all angels sing and play musical instruments. It's the only art they practice, according to all report. There's never been any dissenting opinion about that. And so here they are, this extravagant and marvelous. You see, what is this? It's not any kind of architecture that you ever saw or ever did exist, and it isn't supposed to any more than you're supposed to find these figures familiar. The one which is absolutely mystifying is the figure in the aureole of light. Let's look at the next one over on the right. There you see this angel and the angels and the bodiless angels, the angels of seraphim and cherubim, who have no bodies. They only have wings, and so they're hovering in the darkness. And let's look at the next one on the right. So that's extraordinary. There again, that expression of secret joy, of both of those words equally important. It's an absolute secret, and it's an absolute joy. And it's not going to reveal itself. It's just going to stay secret and joyful. Let's look at the next one. No, not over here. Not on the left. That's it. Because there you have that. Now, people have been trying to identify this, and one of the identifications is that it is there's the figure there among the angels. There is the eternal Maria, the eternal Madonna, when she is in heaven and is accompanied by these angels, and her physical self is there, but also her eternal self, or her soul, is among the angels. And and with that, of course, this great burst of light, this wonderful aureole of all kinds of brilliant, brilliant light, she's almost dissolved in light. It's almost impossible to see her face. Let's look at the next one on the right. There's the great assortment of angels. And the next one, this one of the most beautiful, one of the most extraordinary. I suppose that this painting itself, the Grunewald Isenheim altarpiece, is one of the most stupendous imaginative achievements of human beings. It stands way above anything else that you could think of, except perhaps the Sistine ceiling, in terms of the visual. Just look at the next one over there. And now the one over here. See, that's the side of that picture. And here's the Christ child, looking like the angel, and they playing with beads, which are like the rosary. And you'll see that the loincloth, or the receiving cloth that he's lying on, is actually the cloth of his crucifixion. It's a rotting cloth that's tied around his loins when he's crucified. And the whole scene is constantly moves between the present and the past, exactly, or the future. And exactly as the Maria is the eternal Maria, and also the mother of the child, and the child anticipates the crucifixion and already has the cloth that will be part of his crucifixion. And the world that she lives in, that we see, is a world which absolutely combines the most ordinary, the most earthy, the most undistinguished things, the little crib or cradle which he's to lie in, and the chamber pot, you see, that's down beside it. The whole affirmation of our funny physical selves, of our actual physical selves, that are so difficult to come to terms with, and very difficult to come to terms with when we're in the presence of angels, or when we're in the presence of the divine. And that pulling down to our common physical world is achieved. Let's look at the next one over here on the left. You see the tub that the Christ child is to be bathed in is an ordinary wash tub that was used, of course, right up to the 19th century. You could have found exactly such a tub in great numbers of places. and beside it, the little pot, the chamber pot that the Christ child will need, because he is a human being, and he is therefore caught in our commonality, and no matter what, and at the same time, everything is beyond that. Everything is that, and everything is beyond it. And the pure glass of the pitcher, in opposed to the chamber pot, that kind of possibility of material things to be used by our material selves. Let's look at the next one over here on the left. See, that's a detail of the back behind the Madonna. And here the rose, which she is the Rose of Sharon, constantly referred to as, and then the town, the church that's out beside them. And let's look at the next one. And then angels moving up and down. You see that whole rays of light, they're coming down exactly as they came down for Hildegard of Bingen, you see, flooding on down from heaven, from the divine power, this great rush of light, this great brilliance of this flow, a river of light, on which or through which the angels all move. And let's look at the next one over here on the left. And then finally, the person of extraordinary brightness at the top of the mountain. So that the whole world, the whole universe of our ordinariness and our potential and the extraordinary power that lies behind the world, a sacred power. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm happy to be able to invite you to a sacred meal, which we're going to have, at least a communal meal, which will be revealed to us in a moment, right through those curtains. And everybody, those curtains. So everybody will be able to go and to have a little refreshment, and I'll be able to meet some of you. I'd like to embrace my darling friends.